On the serene morning of October 31st, 2010, Martin, Ohio, lay cloaked in an eerie stillness. Leaves scattered lazily with the breeze, and the calm painted a picture of idyllic rural life. Among the countryside stood the Lisk family home, its inviting exterior betraying the horrors hidden within. 16-year-old Devin Griffin returned home after spending the night at his biological father's house, completely unaware of the nightmare awaiting him. Rushing upstairs to change before heading to church, something caught his eye. The couch in the living room had been transformed into a makeshift bed, a small but unsettling detail. It didn't take long for him to realize it was where his older stepbrother, William B.J. Lisk Jr., had slept. B.J.'s presence was unusual and unwelcome. His rare visits were known to bring more tension than comfort. Devin froze as he saw B.J. sitting on the couch. His demeanor was cheerful but off, too light, too forced. B.J. peppered him with questions. "Where are you going? How long will you be gone?" Devin answered briefly, the unease in his chest growing with every exchange. Brushing off the tension, he hurried out the door, pushing the encounter from his mind. Hours later, when Devin returned home from church, the air inside the house felt heavy and wrong. A suffocating silence filled the space, each step deeper amplifying his unease. "Mom," he called, his voice echoing unanswered. With every step upstairs, his heartbeat thundered in his ears as he tried to convince himself there was nothing wrong. Reaching the master bedroom, Devin stopped in his tracks. The door was ajar, and his mother's legs were visible, hanging off the edge of the bed. Relief flickered briefly. Perhaps she was simply napping. But then he noticed the dark stains on her pillow. Devin's breath hitched. His trembling hands reached out to touch her leg, and the coldness of her skin confirmed his worst fear. The metallic scent of blood hung in the air as his eyes darted to his father, lying motionless under the covers. For a fleeting moment, Devin clung to the desperate hope that this was a Halloween prank. But the crushing truth hit him like a sledgehammer. His parents were dead. Stumbling backward, Devin was overcome with panic. He didn't check on his brothers. He couldn't. He didn't need to. The house that had once been full of life now reeked of death and violence. His hands fumbled for his phone as he dialed his Aunt Lori. His voice cracked as he told her what he had seen. Lori, usually composed, faltered under the weight of his words. She assured him she would call the police and head over immediately. When law enforcement arrived, the quiet facade of the Lisk household was replaced with an unimaginable nightmare. Officers confirmed the grim reality in the master bedroom. William Sr. and Susan were brutally murdered. As they searched the house, they found Derek Griffin, Susan's son, in another room. He, too, had been killed, his life stolen just as violently. The scene was horrific, each detail painted with rage and cruelty. Devin, the sole survivor, stood outside in a daze, his world irrevocably changed. The home he had left that morning as a safe haven was now a crime scene, its walls holding the weight of a darkness that would haunt him forever. This was more than a tragedy. It was an atrocity. A family obliterated, a boy left to grapple with a loss beyond comprehension, and a town forced to confront a horror that would echo through its history for years to come. A house of horrors. When the police entered the Lisk household, the quiet rural charm of Martin, Ohio was shattered forever. The master bedroom bore the marks of unimaginable violence. William Sr. lay still in bed, his face obliterated by a gunshot fired at close range. Beside him, Susan's lifeless body told an even more horrifying story. She had been shot 3 times in the head. Forensic evidence revealed she had been moved after death, and the brutality didn't end there. She had been sexually assaulted post-mortem. The sheer depravity of the act sent shivers down the spines of even the most seasoned investigators. As officers moved through the house, they found another locked door. Breaking it open, they were met with a scene just as haunting. Derek Griffin, Susan's 23-year-old son, was curled in his bed, appearing as though he'd been sleeping peacefully. But the bloodied hammer lying nearby told a different story. His skull had been smashed with savage force, his injuries so severe they left him unrecognizable. The silence in his room was deafening, filled only with the heavy weight of tragedy. The house, once a home full of life, had become a crime scene that bore witness to unimaginable horrors. Blood spatter marked the walls and floors, mapping out the violence that had unfolded. Muddy footprints trailed across the property, leading investigators to the backyard pond, where they believed a murder weapon might have been discarded. But after draining the pond, they found nothing. This wasn't the work of someone acting impulsively. It was the work of someone who knew the terrain and had carefully thought through every step. The first suspicion came from Susan's sister, Lori, who arrived shortly after police. Her trembling voice carried a name that many in the family had likely feared. "It's BJ," she said, naming William BJ Lisk Jr., William Sr.'s eldest son. BJ was no stranger to violent behavior, and his volatile history with Susan made him the immediate suspect. Her words carried the weight of certainty, and the police turned their focus toward him. As the timeline of events emerged, the pieces began to fall into place. William Sr. and BJ had returned from a hunting trip the day before the murders. That evening, the family attended a Halloween party, where neighbors noted BJ's distant and robotic demeanor. It was rare for him to stay overnight at the Lisk home, but his parents, perhaps feeling indulgent or weary, allowed him to sleep on the living room couch. It would be a fatal exception to their usual rules. Neighbors later reported hearing loud noises around 6:30 a.m., gunshots perhaps, but in a rural area they assumed it was hunters. Hours passed before Devon, returning home from church, uncovered the nightmare that lay within. By then, BJ and the family's white Ford truck were gone. With BJ missing and all signs pointing to him, the police began a manhunt. The gruesome brutality of the crime, combined with BJ's history, left little doubt about his involvement. But the deeper question gnawed at everyone involved. Why? Why would a son commit such unspeakable acts against his family? And as the investigation unfolded, the answer began to feel as chilling as the crime itself. The hunt for the killer. As news of the massacre swept through Martin, Ohio, the quiet community found itself gripped by fear and disbelief. The Lisk family, a staple of the small town, was gone in a flash of brutality no one could comprehend. Authorities launched a manhunt for BJ Lisk, and each passing hour added to the tension. The police traced the stolen white Ford truck missing from the Lisk property, following every lead with growing urgency. A breakthrough came from surveillance footage at a nearby gas station. BJ had stopped there not long after the murders, buying a sandwich with an unsettling nonchalance. His calm, detached demeanor stood in chilling contrast to the bloodshed he had left behind. Investigators now knew they were dealing with someone who felt no remorse, someone who could eat lunch after annihilating his family. The search led officers to the Lisk family's hunting cabin in Carroll County, a secluded place hidden deep in the woods. For years, the cabin had been a retreat for BJ and his father, a space to bond over hunting trips and shared conversations. Now, it was the refuge of a killer. The white truck was parked outside, confirming the police's suspicions. As they approached the cabin, they spotted BJ on the porch, leaning casually against the railing with a cigarette dangling from his lips. He didn't flee. He didn't fight. He simply stood there, indifferent to the chaos he had caused. The arrest was swift, but deeply unsettling. BJ didn't resist, and his expression was empty, devoid of fear, guilt, or even anger. It was the face of someone who had either accepted his fate or no longer cared about it. Officers searched the cabin meticulously, cataloging every detail. Bloodstains on his clothing and items inside the truck tied him directly to the murders. BJ's eerie calm only made the situation more grotesque. How could someone so brutal act so emotionless in the aftermath? As he sat in custody, investigators delved into the dark and tangled history of BJ's troubled mind. Diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, BJ had spent years spiraling between treatment and chaos. His refusal to consistently take medication had worsened his condition, leaving him prone to violent outbursts. Alcohol and drugs only fueled the fire, pushing him further into instability. His father, William Sr., had done everything he could to help his son. He fought tirelessly to secure treatment, even going as far as seeking legal guardianship to provide structure. But BJ resisted every effort, and his resentment grew like a shadow. He resented his father for trying to control him. He hated Susan, whom he viewed as an intruder, someone who had disrupted his version of family. This resentment festered for years, boiling over in arguments, threats, and even physical violence. One time, BJ smashed a coffee mug into Susan's chest and stole her car. Another, he openly threatened her during a heated confrontation. These incidents, combined with his erratic behavior, had long been whispered about in the community. Now, those whispers had turned to horror. The town, once skeptical of BJ's unpredictability, saw the full extent of what he was capable of. Stories of his increasing paranoia and detachment from reality began to surface. He had spent years descending into darkness, and now that darkness had swallowed him and taken his family with it. The community was left reeling. How had no one stopped this? Could it have been prevented? As these questions loomed, one thing became devastatingly clear. The tragedy was a culmination of years of silent struggle and unheeded warning signs. The trial of a killer. As BJ Lisk sat in jail, the enormity of his crimes rippled through the justice system, and the lives of those he left shattered. Prosecutors swiftly brought 6 counts of aggravated murder against him, 2 for each victim, accounting for premeditation and the extreme brutality of the acts. Additional charges of robbery and sexual assault underscored the heinous nature of the crime. The evidence was damning. Forensic findings from the crime scene, the blood on BJ's clothes, and the stolen family truck. Yet the trial's focus wasn't on proving guilt. It was on unraveling the motive and determining BJ's mental competency. BJ's defense team entered a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity, pointing to his long history of mental illness. Diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, BJ's struggles with reality and impulse control had plagued him for years. 2 psychiatric evaluations were ordered to assess his fitness to stand trial. Each time the results were the same. Despite his mental illness, BJ was deemed competent. He understood his actions and could participate in his defense. For Devin Griffin, the Lisk family's sole surviving member, the legal proceedings were an excruciating ordeal. Justice was necessary, but reliving the horrific details of that Halloween morning reopened wounds that were still raw. At just 16, Devin carried the heavy burden of discovering the aftermath of BJ's actions. His testimony, along with chilling forensic evidence, painted a harrowing picture of BJ's calculated violence. As the trial neared in August 2011, BJ shocked the court by changing his plea. In a pre-trial hearing, he pleaded guilty to 3 counts of aggravated murder in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. The decision spared him from execution but condemned him to life in prison without parole. When the judge delivered the sentence, the courtroom fell silent. The finality of the words hung heavily in the air, a grim punctuation mark to a story of unimaginable loss. Before sentencing, BJ spoke to the court. His voice was low, his tone detached, as he expressed remorse for his actions. He claimed his mental illness and the influence of Satan had driven him to murder. For the grieving families present, his words felt hollow. The sheer brutality of the crimes, the gunshots, the hammer blows, and the assault on Susan spoke of a darkness far beyond simple remorse. It was a wound they would carry for the rest of their lives. For the community of Martin, Ohio, the trial brought both closure and unease. BJ was someone they had watched grow up. They knew his outbursts, his troubled history, and the strain he brought to the Lisk household. But seeing the culmination of his anger and untreated mental illness shocked even those who had feared him. The legal process had reached its conclusion, yet deeper questions lingered. Could this tragedy have been prevented? Was BJ's mental illness a personal failing, or the fault of a system that had failed to intervene effectively? And, most haunting of all, what could drive a son to destroy the very family that had fought so hard to save him? In the end, the courtroom could only deliver a sentence, not an answer. The story of the Lisk family became a grim reminder of the devastating consequences of untreated mental illness and unresolved family conflict. For Devin, the scars of that day would never fade. For the community, the tragedy would echo as a cautionary tale, forever asking questions that had no easy answers. The aftermath of a nightmare. Life in Martin, Ohio was irrevocably changed after the Lisk family massacre. For those who knew them, the tragedy left an unthinkable wound that would never heal. Devin Griffin, at just 16, was thrust into a nightmare that would haunt him forever. The morning he found his mother, stepfather, and brother brutally murdered became a defining moment, robbing him of his family, his home, and his sense of safety all at once. Devin rarely spoke publicly about that day, but those close to him described a young man carrying a weight far too heavy for his years. He loved his family deeply, even as he navigated the complexities of a blended household. On Halloween morning, 2010, everything he knew was stripped away, leaving behind a legacy of pain and loss. For Devin, the memory of walking into that house and discovering the horrifying aftermath would never fade, etched permanently into his mind. The broader community struggled to process what had happened. BJ Lisk, William Sr.'s eldest son, was no stranger to those in town. His troubled past, his violent outbursts, and his erratic behavior were well known. Yet no one had imagined he could commit such monstrous acts. As the reality of the crime set in, questions began to surface. Could anything have been done to prevent it? Was there a moment when intervention could have changed the course of events? Or was this tragedy an inevitability, born from years of untreated illness and simmering family resentment? BJ's actions left his father's unwavering love and efforts to help him in stark relief. William Sr. had never stopped trying to save his son, even as BJ's mental health deteriorated and his violent tendencies grew. William fought for treatment, offered stability, and refused to give up on his son, even when it cost him his relationship with others. Tragically, that love and determination cost William his life. He died at the hands of the son he had devoted himself to saving. In prison, BJ's life ended as bleakly as it had unfolded. On March 31, 2015, just a few years into his life sentence, BJ was found dead in his cell. He had hanged himself with a bedsheet, leaving behind more questions than answers. For some, his death brought a grim sense of closure. For others, it was a bitter reminder of the failures that had marked his life. Despite the horrific nature of his crimes, BJ was also a man who had spent much of his life fighting demons within himself. His suicide underscored not just his own suffering, but the broader shortcomings of the systems meant to help people like him. The prison system's handling of inmates with severe mental health issues came under scrutiny in the wake of BJ's death. It wasn't just BJ who had been failed. It was his family and, ultimately, the community around him. The Lisk family's story became a cautionary tale about the devastating consequences of untreated mental illness and the emotional toll it takes on those closest to it. It was a story of love and loyalty pushed to its breaking point, of a father's relentless hope ultimately leading to tragedy. For the people of Martin, Ohio, the house where the Lisk family once lived became a chilling reminder of the fragility of life. Some avoided it, unable to confront the memories it held. For others, it stood as a somber symbol of the hidden struggles families endure and the violence that can erupt from unaddressed pain. Over time, the story of the Lisk family faded from headlines, but for those who had lived through it, the scars remained vivid and unrelenting. The questions lingered long after the funerals, the trial, and BJ's death. Could Susan, William Sr., and Derek have been spared if BJ's mental illness had been treated earlier or more effectively? Were there moments when intervention could have altered the course of events? Or was this tragedy destined to unfold, a catastrophic result of simmering resentment and a fractured family? These questions remain unanswered, leaving behind a haunting legacy. The name Lisk, once associated with a seemingly ordinary family, now echoes with pain, loss, and betrayal. Their story is one of love stretched to its limit, of efforts to heal that ended in devastation. It is a reminder of the hidden battles within families and the catastrophic consequences that can arise when those battles are ignored. For those who remember, the Lisk family tragedy stands as a chilling reflection of how quickly life can unravel, and the unrelenting question of why it had to happen. A legacy of pain and unanswered questions. The Lisk family massacre remains a haunting case, a grim reminder of how untreated mental illness and unresolved family conflicts can spiral into catastrophic violence. Forensic psychologists, criminologists, and mental health advocates often cite it as a glaring example of systemic failure, where warning signs were ignored or dismissed, and interventions either came too late or not at all. William Sr. embodied the heartbreaking struggle of a parent torn between love and fear. Despite the physical harm BJ inflicted on him and Susan, despite the fractured family dynamics, William never gave up on his son. He pursued legal guardianship, sought treatment, and sacrificed his own well-being in the hope of giving BJ the stability he desperately needed. Yet, despite his unwavering love and efforts, it wasn't enough. BJ's mental illness, compounded by substance abuse and deep-seated resentment, eventually consumed him. Susan was also a victim long before that fateful Halloween morning. She endured years of tension and violence, trying to maintain peace within a deeply fractured household. Her murder and the unspeakable horrors inflicted on her even after death reflected the depth of BJ's rage and resentment. Derek, young and full of potential, was caught in the crossfire of BJ's unchecked anger. His life was taken by an older stepbrother he could never fully trust, a devastating end to a life just beginning. Devin Griffin, the only surviving member of the household, became a quiet symbol of resilience. While he rarely spoke publicly about the tragedy, those close to him described a journey marked by strength and determination. Devin tried to rebuild his life in the shadow of the unimaginable horror he uncovered that morning. Yet, every milestone, every fleeting moment of happiness, carried the heavy absence of his family. The memories of that day were a constant presence, a reminder of all he had lost. For the community of Martin, Ohio, the massacre was a reckoning. Mental illness, once viewed as an abstract concern, became a tangible threat capable of devastating lives and tearing families apart. The tragedy forced difficult questions. Were there moments when intervention could have changed BJ's path? Could the system have done more to address his mental health struggles? And if so, why didn't it? The massacre challenged the community to confront its biases and the inadequacies in resources available for those battling mental illness. The house where the murders took place was eventually sold, but its history lingered. Stories spread of a chilling aura, of an unshakable sorrow that seemed to seep from its very foundation. Some avoided it entirely, unable to face the dark memories it stirred. For others, it became a somber reminder of the fragility of life and the hidden struggles families endure behind closed doors. Over time, the house became a local legend, whispered about in hushed tones, a place tied forever to tragedy. Nationally, the case sparked broader debates about how the justice system handles individuals with severe mental illness. Was BJ truly culpable for his actions, or was he a victim of his own disordered mind? Could early intervention have prevented the tragedy, or was it inevitable given the circumstances? These debates raised important questions, but they provided little comfort to those left to live with the aftermath. BJ's death in prison on March 31, 2015, closed one chapter of the story but left others unanswered. Found hanged in his cell just a few years into his life sentence, BJ's suicide sparked speculation. Did he end his life out of guilt, or was it another manifestation of the torment that had consumed him for years? Was it a final act of control, or an escape from the consequences of his actions? These questions remain unanswered, leaving only speculation and sorrow. As the years passed, the story of the Lisk family began to fade from public memory, overshadowed by other tragedies and headlines. But for those who knew them, it remained an unhealed scar. The massacre served as a chilling reminder of the delicate threads that bind families together, and how easily those threads can unravel under the weight of illness, anger, and despair. The Lisk family's story became a cautionary tale about love, loyalty, and loss. It exposed the cracks in systems meant to protect those struggling with mental illness and revealed the emotional toll on families trying to hold it all together. William Sr., in particular, stood as a tragic figure, his relentless efforts to save his son costing him his life. For those who remember, the name Lisk endures not as a footnote in true crime history, but as a deeply human story. It is a tale of failure and forgiveness, of horror and heartbreak that forces us to confront our capacity for compassion and our capacity for darkness. The tragedy echoes a sobering truth. Sometimes even the most profound love cannot conquer the demons within. CTA. If this story gripped you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into true crime cases that unveil the chilling realities behind the headlines. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think could have been done to prevent this tragedy? Stay tuned for more stories that uncover the dark and untold truths.